And we're live. Yes.
Hi.
So, hello, everybody watching. On tonight's episode of, well, today in the US, I forget this is a US show, but today in the US, we have the amazing Scottish author, Vivika Widow. So, Vivika, can you explain to anybody who maybe hasn't encountered you because they aren't into your exciting genre, what kind of books you write and how many books you've written and anything else you think is important before the show starts?
Well, I usually write thriller, stroke, horror novels and graphic novels. I wrote my ninth full-length novel there, The Boss, which was actually split into a trilogy. I got a little overzealous in so many pages that my publishers decided, that probably should be 3 books rather than just the one. So, that's me. I've been keeping myself busy with writing short stories and plays as well, so keeps me busy.
Shall we go straight into the first book?
Yeah, why not?
Right. So, It by Stephen King, not IT as I was thinking originally. I don't think he was ever interested in information technology. So, why It by Stephen King then?
Well, I've been a huge fan of Stephen King's ever since I was a young teen, but if I were to pick one book of his that stood out for me the most, it would probably be It. The main reason for that would probably be because I'm absolutely terrified of clowns to start with. So, it kind of really resonated with me. It didn't help that my elder brothers as well would kind of push that fear of clowns, tell me they were watching me from the windows and hiding in cupboards and whatnot. So it was a book that really stuck with me, and for some reason when I'm reading I really enjoy being frightened. So it was one of my favourite King books, and it stands above many of them for me.
So, right, I was thinking I knew what this book was about, but now I'm thinking, what's it got to do with clowns? So for anybody like me who's an ignoramus and hasn't read the book, what actually happens in it without obviously spoiling it too much?
Well, then a celestial being arrives on Earth, which it seems a little kind of out there, but it takes the form of this evil clown and terrorizes these young kids in this small town America. Then, as these kids grow up, they realize that this clown has come back and they need to kind of face it all over again. And underneath it all, it's all about facing your fears, and that it's also a huge theme of that transition from childhood to adulthood and all that entails, the kind of stresses and strains that can bring on. So it's a lot of depth to it. It really does, and you would think so, considering it's a hugely thick book as well at the same time. But it's beautifully written, crazy at times in terms of its descriptive narrative. But it's one of my favourites. Definitely one of my favourite King books.
Okay, well, let's switch on to the next book, which is not by Stephen King. So, Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. I think I got that right.
I don't know who out there who might have seen the movie with Laurence Olivier that was done, a number of years ago.
Yeah.
I saw that first before I read this book, and the twist in it, I don't want to spoil, but it gripped me. It's one of those ones, it's really simple in terms of the twist, but its delivery was just impeccable. And the more I read about Daphne du Maurier herself, the author, the more I was engrossed. She lived her life in a kind of to hell with them kind of way, which really inspires me. And it was a beautifully written book. The setting was just stunning, and the delivery overall was beautiful as well. So it was a book that engrossed me, and I think I've read every book that she ever wrote since then. Nothing quite compares to Rebecca for me. That was one of the top ones. So yeah, it's a beautiful book.
Okay. Well, let's move swiftly on. Another book I've heard of. It's amazing. And it's Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. So, why? Well, I mean, why this Charles Dickens book? I suppose is probably the first question. But why this book?
Again, like Stephen King, I could have probably have chosen any of Charles Dickens' books. I get, I sense a sort of inner eye roll with people when I say about how much of a fan of Charles Dickens I am, because they see it as like, oh, we were forced to learn that in school. It was one of those lessons that we were given. But for me, Charles Dickens still remains one of the top writers that I'm inspired by. His narrative on society in general was always really top notch. And it's funnily enough, even though it was written such a long time ago, it's not changed much in these past few years. His observations are still very relevant today, and I think that's what inspires me the most about it. Is how his thoughts and feelings and inspirations can still be brought to this modern world. But Great Expectations in particular stands out for me because that was one of his books I had actually read. So it was always going to be the top one for me. But it's also the journey within it is innocence and observing the world is just. I find it really sort of. It absorbs me into it. I really get into the story, and it's the same for most of his books, but for that one in particular, it was top notch.
Yeah, because I know a lot of his books were serialized, weren't they, in newspapers? I'm not sure this one.
Yeah.
So I suppose that's something that because you've written short stories and stuff as well, so it's probably why you've got an affinity for Charles Dickens. Okay. So.
Yeah, his commentary on Victorian society was well respected at the time. It was something a lot of people listened to and what they thought of moving forward. So yeah, it still stands the test of time for me anyway.
Yeah. Okay. The next book we've had somebody talk about this a biography of this person, but I'm not sure this book has not been on before. So. It is The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. So yes, why this book?
Again, it kind of veers towards the horror side of things, which I always really enjoyed as a reader, and the exploration of how dark and how deep humanity can fall was a real winner for me, and a page turner for me as well. I'm a fan of Oscar Wilde's work in general, really, and I've just not that long ago read the play The Importance of Being Earnest.
Yeah.
So as I said, I've always been a huge fan of his work, but this darker period, this particular book was one of my favourites because I like the kind of darker side and exploring that darker side of humanity.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm not sure how many people don't know the story of this. I think even I've read this book, and but briefly, for anybody who's been living on the moon and doesn't know the gist of this story, what actually happens in this book?
Well, we find this young man, Dorian Gray, and in his quest to be accepted in society, to be revered, really, he takes this dark turn and is kind of finds himself in this sort of possessed state towards the paintings. It's a kind of play on the narcissism within him, and is as he kind of falls more and more towards the dark side, this painting is moving and showing his true state as the kind of evil that's within him that can't possibly cover the beauty that's on the outside. So it's a really touching story in a sense, but as also a very dark one.
Yeah. Okay. Right. On to the next book, which is The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. Is it Dumas? I think it's Dumas.
I think so.
Yeah.
The first time I read this, I was actually very ill with tonsillitis at the time, and it
No.
was my saving grace being able to, lose myself in this story. It's a long played vengeance story over, decades, but as you follow this journey, you're really drawn into it. I'm a huge fan of big, sort of thick books.
Yeah.
The short stories I enjoy, but I love sinking my teeth into a big, thick book that you really get absorbed in the story, and it takes you a while to get through, and you become a part of that journey. And The Count of Monte Cristo was one of those books in particular. As I was really following this character's journey, his state of mind, and how things turned out for him in the end, as he sought vengeance along the way.
Yeah. Ironically, this book was on last week's show. One of the recommendations. It's a popular book. There's some books that keep turning up again and again. This book, and also nicely, I'm trying to nicely segue onto the next book, which is also rather long.
Oh yeah.
So it's War and Peace, which is known. It's almost joke as being a long book. So
Oh yeah, it's a long one. It is a long one. I don't know how many times I nearly knocked myself out actually holding it up trying to read it in bed.
yeah,
But yeah, as I said, I like following a journey, and when I start a book, I'd like to know that I've got a process to go through, a story to follow, and well, that's one thing that War and Peace most definitely delivers. Like the Dickens books, is one of those things where a lot of people say, "Oh, we learned this in school."
yeah,
It's a lot of long-winded descriptions, a lot of long-winded narratives. But if you let yourself just be absorbed in the story, it is absolutely stunning in terms of the storytelling. So it's one of my favourites. One that I would eventually go back to reading again if I had the time, and just to be a part of that story again would be amazing. So yeah, Tolstoy, definitely one of my favourites.
So not meaning to take the whole hour of the show up, but what actually happens in the book?
Well, it's following the journey of these citizens in Russia at the time of the Napoleonic Wars, and you're starting with them as youngsters, and you're following through as this war's progressing, and it's getting closer and closer and closer to Russia, and the tension is building. It's basically how these people are dealing with life under that kind of situation, and it's again another one thing, unfortunately, that still resides today, and a lot of people can still relate to as we sit right here. So it's a story definitely worth reading and understanding as well. So, as I say, like, learn from the past.
Yeah. Okay, well, it's been recommended twice, so I suppose I should probably spend a couple of months reading the book. Right, on to another one. And it's Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Yeah. So yes, this is another. I think this is another Russian, or it may not be Russian, but Russian book.
Yeah,
so,
it's a Russian novel. It's, for me, for the kind of modern ones, you have like American Psycho, or various films books like that follow the mindset of someone who's snapped. Which in the modern day, you've got lots of great stories, lots of thrilling ones, lots of gory ones, if that's what you're into. But for me, Crime and Punishment was the true understanding of a person that has just gone snapped.
yeah,
And not only does it do that, in comparison to American Psycho, there's a lot of sort of building him up, the main character, and that there's a lot of building him up, and trying to make him seem relatable, or trying to shock people. Whereas for me, Crime and Punishment was far more raw in following their character and his descent into madness, as it were, and the guilt that follows him for the crime that he's committed, and until eventually the resolution. So yeah, it's actually one of my top ones, really. And as I said, I do love the Russian novels.
Yeah. So do you feel that you've managed to put any of that kind of unhingedness into your own books, or has it inspired you in any way, or have you just felt, no, I don't want to, I can't write as well as that, or something along those lines?
No, I do. It's definitely inspired me.
Yeah.
All of these books, you know, I read a variety of books, comedy books, you know, thriller books. So I like to take inspiration from all of them. But Crime and Punishment, that's always my go-to kind of thought process when I'm really wanting to get into the mind of, you know, a darker side of a character. So yeah, it's beautiful and definitely set me on the journey of wanting to write the darker material.
Okay, right. A series of unfortunate events by Lemony Snicket. Is that correct?
All 13 of them.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, is this the one where I've got because I've confused myself because I've got two in the little Amazon thing. I've got A Bad Beginning, and then I've got a series of unfortunate.
A Bad Beginning is part of the series.
Yeah. So A Bad Beginning is the first book, I think, and this is the series. That's why I put them both in. I was wondering why I had. So anyway, describe this huge number of books and why you put it on the list.
Well, the first thing that stands out about this series is the dark humour that's involved, and it always takes me back to some of my earlier days of storytelling, where I would tell this story or I would write this story, and you know the humour would be so black, I would be, you know, finding it hilarious, and of course, you know, I would tell other people, they'd be like, "What is that?" And like, you know, never mind. But Lemony Snicket in this series inspired that because he's not shy of going into the black humour, and it does get rather black at times. And considering that this series is guided towards younger readers, I think it's kind of young adult that it's meant to be for, but it gets dark, but the humour and the dry wit underneath it would keep you moving from page to page to page. It's just really well told, and I like that dark humour, and I've not really read anything like it since, to be honest. There are no imitations that I've came across, so yeah, for me it's the top notch of dark humour and well written stories.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny actually. I think people are frightened of writing dark humour now, probably for all sorts of reasons. People get offended easily, so probably.
Yeah, I think that seems to be an issue, and I think a lot of people are more intending on trying to shock as well, rather than just, you know, humour. Find the humour in even these most ridiculous of scenarios, you know. So yeah, it's one of my favourites. I have a weird sense of humour, so it works for me.
Well, I think it's like everybody has. I'm not sure there is a standard sense of humour. Some people like some things, and other people don't like others. Anyway, I think from my memory, the next book is not a humorous book, but let's find out.
Oh yeah.
So, Let the Right One In by John Ajvide Lindqvist.
As I've always been a fan of Stephen King, and when I first read Lindqvist, I thought, oh, this man has been inspired by them. This is the European version of him. I'm not usually a huge fan of vampire sort of stories. It's just not really something that's kind of stuck with me. But this one is definitely worth the read. If you're into it, then definitely read it. Even if you're not, though, it's a story worth getting yourself involved in. It's a beautifully told story, and the interactions between the characters is also really well written. and I was just blown away by the descriptions in it and the kind of atmosphere that was sent and the overall story as it played out. So yeah, I love this book.
So you've not been tempted to write paranormal books or anything like that, or vampires or
Funny enough,
werewolves?
my first book, Red Snow, was a horror book. It is a horror book. It's a kind of gothic horror book involving witches and witchcraft and things like that, which was something that I was more interested in rather than werewolves or vampires. But, you know, I've kind of moved on since then. But even nowadays, even when I'm trying to set a scene that's dark or someone's kind of frightened, I do enjoy bringing in those horror elements that you would expect from those kind of classically told stories. So, yeah, it's still an inspiration.
Okay, on to the next book, which obviously won't be anything to do with vampires. No, because you don't read many vampire books, as you said. Which is Interview with a Vampire.
It has to be the exception.
By Anne
Apart
Rice.
from Bram Stoker's, obviously.
Yeah. Well, he's been on the show before. Well, not him, but his book's been on the show before. So why Interview with a Vampire then?
The reason this stands out as a vampire story, even though I'm not a big on vampire stories, was because of the way that it was told. As I said, it's meant to be coming from the point of view of this vampire telling his history and how he came to be what he is. And it's like most other kind of interviews or most kind of people that you would meet in the street, this person and what they've been through. And I found that quite fascinating. And Anne Rice has a beautifully way of telling the story as well. She has her word choices are always really nice. So it's reminiscent of those kind of gothic horrors that, you know, Edgar Allan Poe, those kind of ones that I always enjoyed reading and growing up. So yeah, it's one of my favourites and an exception to the vampire rule.
Yeah, I mean, it's only like 10% of your list of vampire books. So it's like, I think you might be in denial here.
Yeah, maybe.
Your secret urge to write a vampire book. Okay, right. On to the next book, which actually has. Well, let me put it. Well, I'll start talking. I'll do the transition and then we'll start talking about it. Lord of the Flies by William Golding, which I have been forced to read as a kid at school. But it has the title that has the least to do with the book, really, anyway. You'd be hard pressed if you didn't know anything about the book to guess it from. So, first of all, take people through what the book is about and then why you like it and put it on this list.
Well, the story follows these young boys who've been stranded on the island, and as they try to start surviving, they segregate into groups, and these groups start fighting with each other, and eventually it leads to tragedy. What it demonstrates is the way that humanity, no matter what, always seems to find a reason to fight with each other, and that stems from these kind of childhood urges and, you know, need to be better than one another, this competition that just arises out of nowhere for some reason. And because of that kind of depth, that's why it made my list. And it's one of my favorite ones because you can see it all playing out, and as you're reading it, you're like, no, stop. But it's a really, really well written story, and definitely one I've enjoyed more than one time as well. I've read it a few times, so yep.
Yeah, it's basically about civilization collapse when you get a load of small boys on an island. Oh, I actually think there was some non-fiction book that claimed that this book actually, they had a very real-life equivalent situation to this and it was perfectly fine. So, I don't know. But, I mean, that's the thing. You can certainly see something like this happening. I think it has probably more relevance for adults and civilization rather than young kids being trapped on islands and the like. So...
Well, what I enjoyed about it was using the kids as a sort of demonstration of our baser kind of forms, or kind of, you know, younger forms, and we have all these chances to grow into something, but what we're going to grow into is these groups that are fighting each other. So it's, a warning from that. So it's, the depth of it, it definitely deserves to make the list for that reason alone.
Okay, right. And it's Trainspotting by Irvine Welsh. Welsh. Is it Welsh or Walsh? Oh, no, it's like...
Yep, something much more grittier that you probably wouldn't be taught in school. When I was younger and Trainspotting first came out in films, I'd seen it and I was like, oh no, that's just horrible from start to finish. It's horrible. And as I grew up and I matured a bit more, it was actually my brother that suggested that maybe you should read it, as an adult and try and understand where they're coming from. And when I did, I was glad I did, because I was absolutely blown away. Because it is filthy, it is horrible, it is disgusting from start to finish. But the poetry that is woven throughout, is just stunning. And I fell in love with Irvine Welsh's work then, as gritty as it can get. And I've just read all of his books since then, just couldn't get enough of it. Trainspotting obviously being the top one, because that's for me the main story at least. And as I said, it's telling such a gritty story with the poetry that he does. It's just amazing to me.
Yeah, well, I've seen the film, but I haven't read the book, so maybe I should read the book. But it's got nothing really to do with Trainspotting. I think it's more to do with Scotland and maybe a little bit of drug abuse and various issues. Well, I mean, the film's a bit confused in places, so I'm guessing it's probably the book was actually probably a better way to consume it anyway.
Well, I did find that the book explains things, and as it does most times when it's books to movies, I think that the book always explains things. There are very few exceptions, but books are most of the time better.
Yeah. Okay. So. And we have The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger, which again is another book I should have read, but I've never read. So, why should I read this classic book? And what is it about, as much as you can say?
Funnily enough, the first thing that drew me to it was the stick that it got quite often. As I said, a lot of people find the main character really annoying because it's this kind of teenager complaining about life a lot.
Yeah.
And I agree with that. It is, they can be annoying, but that's teenagers for you. But I followed his story, what he's doing, and all the complaints that he has. But when it gets to the end, without giving away too much, there's this really subtle moment where everything is stripped back from everything that he's been complaining about, everything that he's said, everything that he's been through. It's all stripped back for this one brief moment where you're reminded that this is just a child.
Yeah.
And that moment at the end of the book just hits me like, oh, I've been following this through, and it's just, it was really, really nice to read in that sense. And it kind of brings you back, like, remind yourself that, not to take life too seriously in that sense as well, like that inner child that's kind of crying out and complaining all the time. So it was, it was a really nice book in that way. Probably many people wouldn't agree, they just get annoyed with him, but I saw that at the end and I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, well, I think there's something to be said for writing or reading books where the main character isn't somebody you necessarily sympathise with if they're an interesting enough character. I mean, I think authors are probably sacrificing some popularity if their main character is quite unlikable, but it can be quite interesting to read, especially if the story goes in a particular way.
Well, I've always been quite keen in bringing characters that have flaws because, we as people have flaws. And for me as an author, it's actually much more fun to write these characters that are, annoying or antagonistic or, and there to really throw a cat among the pigeons sort of thing. So I can get that. I can get why a lot of readers would be like, no, that's off-putting for them. But for me, it's like, I get into that. I enjoy that. So.
Yeah. Okay. Right. And it's Rosemary's Baby by Ira Levin. Is it Levin or Levin? Well, one of those. So
yep.
Yeah.
Well, this poor woman is having a baby, and
Yeah.
she, without spoiling it too much, she realizes that she's giving birth to something that she might not want to have. So it's a horror book. It is a horror book essentially, and it has a kind of cultish themes. This kind of sell your soul to the devil kind of playing underneath it. So that gripped me alone as a kind of horror fan. So it's definitely one of my favorite ones. Is one of my favorite Ira Levin ones. I've read loads of their books, but this one of the top ones. And it kind of plays out, and you're feeling sorry for this woman, and you're kind of wondering how it'll end for her if it ends. So it keeps you on the edge of your seat as you're reading it. So that's a good one.
Yeah. So I'm seeing quite a bit of a horror theme here. At least it doesn't involve. Well, hopefully, it doesn't. Well, if it does involve vampires, don't spoil it for anybody.
No vampires in this one, no.
So yeah. Okay. Well, we are listening. Well, I was going through the books really quickly because you had a lot of books, but we are going. But the next book, I suspect, from looking at the author, is not a horror one.
Oh, yep. So
it's Going Postal by Terry Pratchett. Not the first Terry Pratchett book on this list by a long time. So why Going Postal?
When I first got this book, my brother was actually working in the post office at the time, and I thought this was hilarious because this book follows this person being punished by having to work in the post office.
Oh, okay.
So I read it, but Terry Pratchett, it always cracks me up when I read his books. He was such a funny, witty writer, and how he came up with it is beyond me. But it was just really funny to read, really fun, vibrant characters, and it brings a lot of colour when you're reading it as well. So it's beautiful in that way.
Is it set in his Discworld thing, or is it a separate book?
Yeah, no, it's set in the Discworld, and as I said, it's following this person punished having to work in the postal office.
Yeah.
And how he deals with that. So it's really funny. It's one of the funniest ones I've read. You could pick many of them that way, but yeah, it's a good one.
Okay, and no vampires.
No vampires. Well, actually, there might be vampires in that, but that's not the purpose of the book.
Yeah. Okay. All right. To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee, another famous book I haven't read. So, why this immensely famous book, and what happens in it for people like me who are ignoramuses?
Well, it's set in the South, and the South of America, and it's following this lawyer who's been asked to defend a black man accused of raping a white girl, and all the racial tensions that brings, and the kind of self-discovery that the lawyer's daughter goes through as she tries to learn why her dad's defending this person and why it's bringing up so much controversy in his defense. It's one of those books that I would definitely recommend to anybody to read. Yeah. And it's probably another one of those ones that you would generally get in school as well, but it's worth the read, it's worth the commentary, and it's so well written that I've not met a person that hasn't read it and haven't felt changed in a way by having read it. So it's definitely worth the read.
Is it like just really, really well written, or is it the theme of the book that is what kind of the emotional journey that is the reason why you think it's such a powerful book?
I would say both.
Yeah.
As it says, you can. A lot of authors can have this really good theme that makes it so much easier to write. and certain themes that are always going to be hard hitting, regardless of the way that it comes across. But this had a combination of both. It was told from the perspective of this and of the little girl, the lawyer's daughter. So you're following her innocence through it, and it's taking you through a journey as you're learning about the characters, you're learning about why they think the way that they're thinking, and why this trial is such a big deal, and why there's segregation in the first place. So yeah, it's definitely the best way to bring you through it. And as I said, it's definitely worth the read, and a lot of people have been changed by it, and a lot of people have been inspired by it. It's such a good book. It is a really good book.
Okay. And another famous book next. Les Mis, I'm not going to say Les Miserables, by Victor Hugo. So clearly this is being made into a musical, and also a film that I actually sat through and watched for some reason, but probably better than the film. But anyway, why did this book make your list, and what happens in it for the few people who don't know?
Well, it's following the story of this man who stole a loaf of bread.
Yeah.
And he was sentenced to a ridiculous amount of years in jail because of it, but he managed to escape. And the journey follows the pursuit of this man as he kind of lives his life, and it goes through starts to go through the generations and the people that he meets. Like it says, it's the miserable people, and it's a very bleak story. But it's one of those big stories that you get really absorbed in. So it was always one of my favorites, and I happen to be a huge fan of the musical. So it's a winner for me in that way, and I love getting involved in a big story, and it doesn't get much bigger than Les Mis.
Yeah, it's set in is it Revolutionary France, or is it before?
Yeah, Revolutionary France. Yeah.
So if
It's
people didn't guess from the title,
it's a kind of starting the student uprisings that happened just before the revolution, so it's kind of leading up to that. So, but yeah, it's a lot of danger, a lot of vibrant characters, a lot of excitement in it. So, yeah, if you can go for the big books, then that's definitely one to go for.
So how does it compare to the musical then? Is the musical, well, if you had to pick one to be stuck on a desert island with either watching, well, I'm not sure how you get the musical on the island, but let's say that you had a video recording of the musical. Would you prefer that, or would you prefer the book?
I prefer the book, but I'm such a bookworm, it's always going to be the book for me. So the music tells the story in a highly entertaining way, but the book you're going to get so much more out of, because that's the way it was always originally intended to be told, the story. So yeah, I would definitely say the book.
Okay, right. And the next book is George's Marvelous Medicine by Roald Dahl, which I'm guessing is not horror related, but I could be wrong there.
Well, it depends on how much you want to class the horrors in.
Yeah.
Poisoning your grandma to grow over to a ridiculous size could be classed as horrific. So. Which, incidentally, is one of the reasons why Roald Dahl is one of my favourite authors of all time.
Yeah.
But yeah, this one in particular was the standout one for me. It was always one of my favourite ones. Just the wording that Roald Dahl has that was kind of his signature is, always one of the things that stood out for me. And for the story to play out the way that it does, and George trying to, give his horrid grandma this horrible medicine, and it causes her to grow to ridiculous sizes. It was fun. It was, exciting, and a story that's worth reading, and a lot of great times can be had from, telling this story to my nieces and nephews. So,
yeah, I think that's something about Roald Dahl, is that his stories have always. I remember as a kid, his stories were always interesting as a kid. there's a lot of other authors who, especially ones you're supposed to do at school, and like they're just boring stories for kids. Really, they're not sort of something like War and Peace or whatever. Wouldn't necessarily be something that 14-year-olds would find interesting, but something like this obviously would. So I think that's something where he's always been very good, Roald Dahl, as an author.
But he always had a bit of a darkness to his storytelling, even
Yeah.
for the younger audience, which I always enjoyed. Like The Witches, for instance, that book is, you know, really dark for what
Yeah.
you would think it, and a few of the other ones as well, even ones like James and the Giant Peach, or, you know, even the Twits. You know, there's a dark edge to it, but that's what gripped me. So.
Yeah.
And inspired me as well. I was inspired a lot by Roald Dahl.
Yeah. Okay. And the next book, I've not read the book. I've seen the film of it. And I've got a story, but I'll put it up and do the transition. So it's Watership Down by Richard Adams. This is the only film that I think I've shown it at school and I had to leave because it made me cry. So I'm guessing the book is similar. So
It is absolutely heartbreaking. It is. But I guess I must be a bit of a glutton for punishment because
yeah.
I like that. I saw the movie when I was a kid, and I actually had a pet rabbit at the time, so it was just absolutely devastating for me.
Yeah.
But the first time I read the book was actually quite recently, and because I wanted to see just exactly where all this weird imagery and all that kind of thing that I was getting from the movie when I was a kid, I wanted to see where that came from, and so I read the book, and obviously as an adult you can fully understand what the author was trying to convey, this desperation among the rabbits. But what stood out most for me about this book is how he humanized the rabbits in the sense that they could communicate, and, you know, they had, you know, their feelings and thoughts and whatnot, interactions towards each other. But he never seemed to veer away from the fact that they were still rabbits.
Yeah.
Which is something that I've never seen. Usually when you read these books, it's like they're either humanized or they're animals. This, you know, Richard Adams managed to capture a nice balance between the both of them, and reminding you that these were still rabbits, and they were thinking like rabbits. Their interactions were like rabbits. So, yeah, for that reason, that one stood out for me. But overall, as devastating as the story is, it is stunning, and the ways that it's really hard to put into words, but they managed it, and it was just beautifully written.
Yeah, I think it's kind of, well, from what I can remember of the film, I think I have watched it since and not been quite so traumatized, but it is about the part of the theme of it is the progress. It's like progress coming in, and they're all happy in their little field, and then there's a big wave of stuff comes and they have to leave their nice home and go on the run, basically. I think that's probably was a theme. I'm not sure when this book was written, but it must have been written quite a way back, and probably the whole idea of countryside being taken over and bulldozed.
Well, Richard Adams, from what I read, was the son of a kind of countryside vet. So that's where he got a lot of the inspiration from. And so when you learn little details like that about the author, you're like, you know, I see it. You know, I understand where you're coming from. And yeah, Richard, the Watership Down was just, it got to me, and it was such a really nice story, as horrible as it can be.
Right. The next book probably doesn't have any vampires in it. I'm not sure.
No vampires.
So it's The Boss by Vivika Widow, which is you,
Yeah.
in case anybody can't read the name at the bottom. But so this gives us an opportunity to talk about your books, specifically this one. So why did you write this book? Where is it in the series of books you've written? And anything else you feel like saying about it?
Well, the series of books I write are designed in such a way that you could read any at any point. And, you know, there isn't a particular order that you need to read them in. but if you read them all, you get a kind of bigger picture of what's happening in this fictional city of Colford. The boss is the nickname for the prison in Colford, and I wrote that specifically for the reason because a lot of readers kept saying, "It's like there's such a there's a lot of horrible people running about these streets. It's a very dangerous city." And I kept saying to them, I was like, "Well, wait till you see what kind of people they have locked up. Then you think that's bad? Let's take a look behind the bars of their their biggest prison." It's written in a way, I mentioned earlier about the black humour, and it's written in a way that, it's meant to be not so much funny, because, as I said, I'm probably one of the few people that would find some things that happen funny, but the humour is very dark and very sharp, so it's not meant to be taken 100% seriously, and because the narrative is coming from what's meant to be the building of the boss herself, and she's kind of telling the story of these inmates that are trapped within. So as I said, it's kind of colloquial in the way that it comes across, and absorbing you in the story of these people and how they've found themselves there and the reasons that have brought them to it. So it was a long time. It was a long undertaking. As I say, that was the one I mentioned earlier that split into a trilogy that it kind of spelled out so much. So it's been out now for a month or so, and thank you for everybody that's read it so far, and I hope more people go on to enjoy it and see what comes next.
Yeah. So this is basically your latest book, but it's set in the same town, but it's the hardcore people in prison in the same town that you've written about before. That's basically the summary of it.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we'll come back to your books and everything, but every time I do this show, I like to have a dream pick. I ask somebody to pick a item from Amazon that they would pick if money was no object. Well, you picked something from amazon.co.uk, which isn't on amazon.com, but I liked it so much that I'm going to include it anyway. So hopefully this can work. One time I did this, it crashed the entire session. So yes. So the item you picked was a wooden dollhouse, which looks amazing, to be honest. It's a self-assembly one. So why did you pick a dollhouse as your money is no object item from? Well,
I've always wanted one, ever since I was little, and even now as an adult, I still have a huge doll collection. So it would fit in nicely. My creepy dolls, as my niece and nephew call them, the huge amount of porcelain dolls. So yeah, it would add in there nicely, and I would take very good care of it.
You're home for your creepy dolls, then. Is that basically the reason why you picked it?
Yep.
Okay.
There's a little house.
Yeah, we actually have a comment on the show. I can't put it up because this is Amazon, and it's a pain in the neck to actually do it. But they did say requiring students to read full books is a form of torture, which I think I probably agree with, to be honest. So let's finish off by talking about, have you got any books planned you're going to write? And have you got some super book that you want to write that you just haven't worked your way up to writing yet?
Well, I'm currently working on my next novel, and fortunately it's a bit early days, so I can't really release too many details of it, but I'm always working on something, to be honest. A lot of focus has been on playwriting recently. So I'm hoping to get some productions going at the end of the year. So, unlike the books, these plays are actually set in this same kind of fictional city. So, I'll be releasing more details on that on my website as it progresses. So, and hopefully it'll catch interest and people will want to come along and see it.
Okay. All right. I've also got another nasty question I keep asking people on this show, but I'll ask you. Well, I'll ask you in different ways. If you were stuck on a desert island and you could only have one of these books with you, which of the books would you pick?
Probably it would be a toss-up between some of the longer ones to keep me occupied on this desert island. I think I would probably have to go with Les Mis, because there's plenty in that to keep me occupied till I get rescued.
Yeah.
Probably wouldn't have Lord of the Flies, just in case, you know.
Yeah, well, it depends how many people you were stuck with, really, wouldn't it? Especially if you're stuck with a load of young school kids, then you might end up with a thing. Okay, and I'm going to ask you the question again, but in a slightly different way. Hopefully, you might have the same answer. I don't know, but if you had to give somebody else one of these books as a gift, which one would you pick? You'll have different answers if you want to say, for this kind of person, we'll have this book and this part, if you want to.
Probably. Oh, I don't know. Crime and Punishment, probably.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it did seem that was a particularly impactful book for you.
Yeah, I would still count that as one of my absolute favourite books of all time. So if they want to get, where I'm coming from, read Crime and Punishment.
Yeah. No, it's like I think it's been on before. I'm not sure. There's lots and lots of these books because I had a long period when I was because for years I didn't really like reading or doing much at school with English, even though I was quite good at the English part, like the writing part of it. I wasn't quite good at that, but the reading part of it, I was like, oh god. But I made an effort when I was working and commuting to read lots of sort of classic books. But there was a lot that I like Crime and Punishment that I never got around to reading. I used to read them on my phone on a Kindle device on the way to work. But yeah, I've started listening more to audiobooks now. So if I can find the audiobook version, I might do. I might struggle through reading Crime and Punishment.
I keep saying to myself I'm going to try audiobooks. I've not really followed many, so I need to give that a go.
Yeah, it's interesting because you can listen to audiobooks when you're doing other things, so you're walking around and doing stuff. But there is it's like with podcasts. I have a spell of listening to loads and loads of audiobooks and loads of podcasts and things, and then I don't listen to any for ages. So it's a bit hard to do it. So anyway, I think we've come to the end of the show. It's not too dark here, which is one advantage to having light summers here in the UK. It's probably even lighter there up in Scotland.
Yeah, it's still quite nice outside.
Yeah, it give you an opportunity to escape. So thanks so much for being on the show, and thanks for having me. Thanks for the viewers. Well, it looks like it's a viewer at the moment. Somebody's stuck with us right to the end. So thanks to the viewer, and I'll try and work out how on earth to end the show now. So I think I press this button. This is when I madly tap the same thing. Yeah, and